Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever Moonshot NFT Podcast. My name is Elliott and I'm joined with my co-host Matt, and we are here today to try and help make sense of this crazy yet exciting world of NFTs. Now, we've created this podcast specifically to enlighten people who are very much like us. So, you see, at our core, we are business people. Matt runs a highly successful multi-eight-figure global recycled plastics company, in fact. And I myself run a digital advertising agency based in London. And so we're not crypto people, we're not necessarily NFT people, but we both became, I'd say, crypto curious a few years ago. But in the last 12 months, we really fell quite deep down the NFT rabbit hole. So much so that back in April, we actually founded our own private NFT investment club, the Moonshot DAO. And so just to be clear from the outset, I think this is a podcast not for hardcore, super-techy crypto people. No, this is specifically designed for the everyday investor. Now, the everyday average Joe who may have heard about these NFTs in the news. You might be considering some financial exposure to this new, very exciting, very risky, very volatile asset class. And you just want to develop an actual proper understanding without all of the really confusing jargon and BS. So, in this very first episode, we just want to cover the basics. The big question, what the hell are NFTs? With a little sprinkling of interesting stories and tales from ourselves about how we've made a lot of money, lost a lot of money, got hacked, and ultimately whether or not we think it's actually worthwhile you spending time learning and getting involved in NFTs in the future. So the goal of this episode really is to trigger that aha moment of I finally get it, I finally understand what NFTs are. So, quick little disclaimer before we dive in. This is, of course, not financial advice. Please do your own research. But to kick us off, I just wanted to hone in on the actual definition of NFTs, also known as non-fungible tokens. Now, the first thing to understand is fungible. What the hell does fungible mean? So, money is fungible. All that means is it can be easily swapped. So, your pounds, your dollars, even your bitcoins are all the same. Therefore, you can easily swap £1 for another person's pound. It's fungible. Non-fungible things are things that are unique, like a rare Pokemon card, the Mona Lisa, and even a house. So things that are very unique and different. Now, non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, simply are unique assets, typically digital assets, that simply use the blockchain as a mechanism to prove that it is unique and that someone actually owns it. Now, when I first heard that definition a while ago, it still didn't click in my head what the hell an NFT was. Matt, can you remember when you had that aha moment when you finally understood what NFTs were?
I'm not sure I can pinpoint the moment when I finally understood what NFTs were. I think I'm still learning what NFTs are now, to be honest. I think what's important from how I started with this, or my partner and I started with this, I should say, is it came from something completely non-crypto or NFT related, and that's a man called Gary Vaynerchuk, who some of you, perhaps if you're certainly in this space or have listened to anything to do with NFTs whatsoever, I'm sure or confident that you'll have heard of Gary V. He's an entrepreneur based in New York and someone I've been following business-wise for several years. And so it was like back in April 2021 when all of his content turned to the subject of NFTs. He was about to release his NFT project, and I, at the time, knew nothing about NFTs whatsoever, but I had not taken action on so many things that I'd heard Gary V say in the past, like definitely not crypto or NFT related stuff about a lot of social media content, TikTok in particular, things that I just heard him say, thought, yeah, that makes sense, understood it completely, but just did absolutely nothing. So didn't act. And then when the few people that did succeeded because of it, it's impossible not to kick yourself and think, well, I was because I'd seen him a couple of times live in person and still didn't take it on board. And when you then realize you should have, you kick yourself. So for some reason, and I think it was just the good timing of, I think, to be honest, it was slightly spurred on by lockdown situations in that early part of 2021 as well. It wasn't like we could do everything that we had done in the past. So I remember 2 weekends very clearly where I locked myself in my office and just read as much as I could, really a lot of stuff that he was sharing to his audience as to what they were and how to get started. And the difference was this time, like I'd made the commitment to myself that I'm just going to do it. Didn't know what it was, but the main difference was I then learned by doing. And I think that's key to this, is not just if you're curious enough to want to figure it out and get started, that's the best thing to do. So that started back in late April, early May, I think, 2021. Where we created our MetaMask wallet. I was fortunate in that a mutual colleague and friend of ours had explained to me about cryptocurrency in the February of that year. That was more luck than anything else. He'd had a bit of good fortune with Bitcoin in the first quarter of 2021, and so he was explaining that to me, and so I already had a Binance account, which was necessary when it came to, I didn't know at the time that was going to be necessary, but so I knew what Ethereum was, which is the currency that certainly Gary V's NFT project was traded in. So I was very lucky there, had a head start in terms of that was familiar, had the Binance account, knew, I'd be lying if I said I knew what Ethereum was, because I didn't. Do I still? I've not probably nowhere near as much as, but I was familiar enough to be like ready to follow the steps. And Gary Vee and his team really did set it out as a do this, then do this, step-by-step guide. And so when he launched his project, which was delayed like most NFT projects are because we are so early in this space, even now, even though we're 15 months on from when we got started, like it's still incredibly early. And so everything is still incredibly unuser-friendly, very friction-full, not frictionless. It's a nightmare. It's like doing any kind of online purchase or whatever. If you get frustrated by the internet being slow or by something starting and then just, I don't know, cutting out or having to start from scratch, if that really winds you up, then this probably isn't for you, because it's that a lot. And but so his project was delayed by at least a week, I think, maybe even 2. And this is important to the story because he's such a hype guy, which is not too disrespectful. He's a salesman at heart. But it meant that on mint day, and he did his project by a Dutch auction, which again, didn't have a clue what that was at the time, but it means that they start at a higher price, and then every 15 minutes it dropped in value. And so when we were choosing what we were going to buy, we were like under this impression that they might sell out. So it was a real kind of, you could see how many were left, and there were lots left. So we felt pretty comfortable, confident leaving it until the lower kind of end. But even when it got down, it was going to get down, the core tokens that we were buying were going to get down to 0.5. And we still pulled the trigger for the first one at 0.6 because we still believed that we don't want to miss out. And especially after investing quite a lot of time in it at that point, I really didn't want to miss out. And as I said, like the whole reason for doing it was I'm not going to act this time around.
So that was 0.6 ETH.
0.6 ETH, which at the time ETH was expensive. At the time ETH was just under £3,000 for one ETH.
It's about 1,700 quid.
Yeah, the first NFT we ever purchased was £1,700. It was a spontaneous seahorse core VFriends, which meant about as much to us at the time as it probably does to most people listening to this.
Which is hilarious. I think it's a fantastic story. And Gary Vee and his VFriends is, I think, a very good place for the majority of non-techie people to begin to dip their toes into the world of understanding NFTs. Because it's quite hilarious what he did with this collection in a way, because the artwork for his collection, which was a collection of just over 10,000.
Yeah.
So 10,000 unique digital bits of artwork in essence that were all digital copies of hand-drawn animals that Gary himself did. So if you actually get the VFriends collection up and show it to someone who's not aware of Gary Vee and VFriends or NFTs, it's quite hilarious. It's just a collection of these really weird-looking kids' drawings. And so I think what Gary also did, which was very clever, and I think this is part of the package of him being a traditional businessman, very much in the digital media agency advertising space as myself. So because he pivoted and transitioned into this world of NFTs coming from his traditional background, whereas a lot of the more historical, shall we say, NFT projects that were around were very crypto, techy, innovative people already in the space. So Gary understood that the people coming into his project would have to have this steep learning curve around NFTs, what they are, how you use them, and why they could be so valuable. And so what I know a lot of people in the NFT space are very appreciative of is the fact that he spent a lot of time preparing his audience for his NFT project.
Yeah, 100%.
So you'll be able to talk more about it. But the months prior, he put out a lot of information about how to get set up, walking you through the process, because the one thing that is really halting crypto's widespread adoption, in my opinion, is the usability, because it is so flipping difficult.
Yeah, he onboarded like so many people at that time, I think, and I'm pretty sure there's data out there as to approximate numbers as to how many new kind of MetaMask wallets were created in that time when he launched his project, and a lot of it was because of the education that he put in place. But I'm sure it's still a very small minority of his kind of community and the people that follow him, because it was just a really kind of bold step and I guess a little bit of a brave thing to do if you had no knowledge of it whatsoever.
It certainly was brave.
It could have also been stupid at the time. So we bought the first one, decided we knew all along we wanted two, and the reason we wanted two was one of the things that he included with his fees was this, not just the digital token, but a physical or real world attribute to it, which was each of his VFriends NFTs gave you access to attend VCon, which is like the Gary V conference once a year for the next 3 years, 22, 23, and 24. And Charlotte and I we knew that was like, we wanted to go together, so we knew we had to have two tokens. So that was always what we were going to do. We bought the second one at like 0.5, went for the sophisticated Stingray because it was similar to the Seahorse. And we basically judged it by which drawings we liked the most at the time, which now we know what we know. It feels a bit silly because we've learned so much about how the characters were. The characters matter to a certain extent. Also, I have no experience whatsoever in like trading cards, and so I didn't know that the backgrounds matter. I think a little bit more about that than me, but there were rare ones, spectacular ones, bubblegum background, diamond background, and having never been in that world at all of that went straight over my head, so I didn't have a clue about that.
Yeah, it was very clever what he did, and I think you touched on a couple of key points there. The real life utility, and then also the rarities of the VFriends, right? And this ties into a core aspect of NFTs and why they're useful in the digital age. Because ultimately, the whole problem that NFTs solve is this idea of proof of ownership for a digital asset. Because I'm sure everyone listening to this has got a phone or a computer of some sort. If not, well done for doing the impossible. But digital images and assets around the interweb is very easy to replicate. You heard this whole concept of right-click save. If I send you a picture from my phone to your phone, all of a sudden, 2 copies of that now exist, etc., etc. And so where NFTs come in is they tie the original asset, the original image, the original whatever it might be, to a particular owner. So whilst there may be many copies of it that exist, you can only ever prove that there's one person that owns it. And because of this, all of a sudden, digital assets can now be traded much like a house. Because obviously, if you own a house, yes, I can come and take a picture of your house, but that does not mean I own your house. And because you have the actual deed, when you want to up and move to a different neighborhood, only you can sell that house. I can't take a picture of it and then try and sell it. That is, in essence, the problem that NFTs solve. And because of this, you're able to create a group of digital assets like Gary Vee and his VFriends, of these 10,000 digital assets that only 10,000 people can own. And therefore, these can now be bought and sold. So there is an element of value to them. And so what this then means is that Gary Vee was able to introduce elements of rarity to his collection. And so very much like Pokemon cards, how you have when you open a pack of Pokemon cards, 6 or 7 of them will be all the commons, and there's going to be many more commons available. But you've got a chance that one at the end is going to be really rare, like a really rare shiny Charizard, which if you get is very valuable. Because out of all the millions of Pokemon cards in circulation, there's only a handful of that particular card. Therefore, the scarcity of it makes it valuable. And because these NFTs have the proof of ownership, they are able to introduce this element of scarcity. So Gary Vee in his collection have got the vast majority of them are all common ones, but then there are ones with bubblegum backgrounds, diamond backgrounds, and gold backgrounds, which are obviously there's fewer and fewer of them. So there's this element of rarity and collectability to them, very much like Pokemon cards. And as you'd imagine, the ones with the very rare backgrounds are much more valued and therefore charge a much higher price on the open market. But then where the other aspect of this ties in is when you're able to have this proof of ownership, you can tie in all this real life utility. Just like how he puts on this new conference every year specifically for anyone that owns one of his NFTs. And so the only way you can get into this conference, which was in Minnesota last year, is if you have your NFT and that you prove that you own it. And there's whole other elements of in real life stuff that he's done with it, hasn't he?
Yeah, since then. And it took me, I think, at least several weeks before realizing he'd spoken about the benefits of the full transparency of people's. And it wasn't until, definitely a month or so in where we just continued to learn about it, and then spent a lot more time on this main website called OpenSea, which is the kind of, certainly in my experience, the main marketplace online for NFTs. There are a lot more now. But OpenSea was a place that we would look for NFT projects and see other sort of activities. And we realized after a while that Gary Vee had always said in the future he can see a time where he used the example of like, if you're on a dating app and you're trying to meet people or find a date the person that you want a relationship with, you'll look potentially at their digital wallet to see what they own and what are they into. And that meant very little to me at the start because, like I said, I didn't really understand the blockchain to that extent. I didn't understand anything about Etherscan, the website where you can literally see every transaction. And it was only when, I think, through one of the groups, certainly in Discord, that we'll talk about in a bit, I've managed to get a link to Gary's wallet and then a few other kind of key people within the space and realize that you can see all of the NFTs that they own that are in their wallet because it is completely transparent. And so that is the benefit.
It's a really interesting point, and a really key point, because everything done on any blockchain is publicly visible to anyone. So you can look up every single transaction ever done to every single wallet, which is why there's a really funny, in my opinion, common myth about Bitcoin and about how in its early days it was the go-to place for lots of criminals to buy Bitcoin to then use on the dark web, thinking it was this untraceable network. But actually it's like the most publicly visible network ever because the whole history of every single transaction on Bitcoin is stored in a ledger for everyone to see. Now, of course, the wallets that are connected to it are anonymous, but at some point, someone has to connect that wallet to some sort of centralized exchange in order to either turn their crypto into cash, etc. So there is likely an identity link there. But as you said, the whole point that with NFTs, you can go in anyone's wallet and see exactly what they hold. And this idea of transparency as well is also very interesting.
Yeah, so if I go back, what happened to us, just because I think it's a very relevant part of why we're sat here today, was in May 21, we essentially would spend the best part of £3,000 on these two NFTs, which we didn't know whether that was a good idea or a bad idea.
So what was it that gave you the confidence to spend £3,000 on two pictures that looked like they were drawn by kids?
It essentially, at the time, just Gary Vee. Just knowing that everything I'd heard him say in the past had worked out for the people that had actually acted on it, rather than people like me that had just listened and then done nothing. That was it, and that was enough. And fortunately, it paid off because in less than a month later than that, we bought a third one. But at this point, the floor price we bought, it was pretty much off the floor. And the floor price was already 4.2 for the same kind of core token that we bought. Now,
so what was that in pounds?
ETH had dropped down in value by quite a bit. ETH was £1,300 at that point. So that third V-Friend, which we went for the independent inchworm for some reason, that was just shy of £5,500. So we bought that third one for 5,000, 500 quid, just about.
Nice.
But then I should fast forward to August, September of the same year. The floor price got up to an all-time high, I think, of 22 Ethereum.
That was insane.
So each one was worth a minimum of £40,000 at that point.
So those first ones you bought for 0.6, and within 6 months they were worth 22. So that was from roughly £1,700 to over £40,000 in the space of 6 months.
Yeah, and it was at that point that we began to talk to other people about it, because we hadn't shared this information with really anyone between May and certainly July, maybe beginning of August, because we still felt a bit weird about it. We didn't understand it enough. We weren't about to say to people, oh, you should go all in on this because it's a dead cert, because of course it wasn't, but it had taken over our lives by that point. It was very addictive and it was fun. And of course, when you're seeing that sort of increase in value, it's impossible not to get sucked into it and just think it's the smartest move ever made. And
Bet you're walking around a couple of inches taller.
It was good because it doesn't mean anything because we didn't sell at that point. We did list. The reason I know it got to 22 was because we had, for some reason, we decided to list one of the VFriends for 20 around that time. And I remember we had it for sale for 20 because essentially OpenSea works just like eBay or any other online marketplace that you buy and sell stuff on. So we had listed it for sale. There's no cost in doing that. Oh, maybe there's a small gas fee to begin with. That is another rabbit hole we could go down. But a small fee anyway to list it for sale. But we saw that the floor was creeping up and up and up. And we were like, oh, hang on, we're about 4 away from the cheapest one. And then I can't remember why we changed our mind, but we were like, actually, we don't want to sell. So we delisted it. And then it got up to about 2 ETH higher than that. So 22, I remember it at. And because we got so involved with it, we made what turned out to be a very good decision in the July of that same year, in that we bought a Bored Ape on the 1st of July for 3 ETH at the time.
A Bored Ape, that was a picture of a monkey.
Bored Ape was a picture of the monkey. I remember it very clearly. We were sat on the sofa at home. I think we'd seen some stuff about Bored Apes, but didn't have any clue. And Gary Vee wasn't behind it. So like he wasn't the authority that was, that made us feel like it was a good bet. It was just something. And we were deep in the sort of NFT Twitter, because that's where certainly we see most of the information that we see. If you just follow hashtag NFTs or hashtag NFT community on Twitter, you see all these PFP projects, which is where people use their profile picture they use the image from the NFT as their profile picture, and so somehow got intrigued about this Bored Ape Yacht Club, probably because it was a yacht club and that sounds fun, or I don't know what it was, but I remember doing some research on the website, and it said that if you bought a Bored Ape NFT, you got to go into and owners could do graffiti on the bathroom wall or something crazy.
Wow. So how much did you pay in pounds to the privilege to graffiti on the bathroom wall?
So ETH at the time was £1,800. That cost us around about just over $5,500.
Another $5,500.
And
sounds pretty crazy.
Yes, and I've never gone into the bathroom and done graffiti. Never even found out what that meant, to be honest. But bought this Bored Ape. Chose one that we like the look of. If you go on to OpenSea after this, or just Google Bored Ape Yacht Club, you'll see that they all look very similar. It's a 10,000 token project, all with different rarities. Again, didn't know anything about what was better or worse than another at the time, so didn't know that 3D glasses would mean that they would be more valuable, or like certainly laser beams from the eyes mean more valuable. Any merch like BAYC on the t-shirt or hat would be more. Just didn't know any of this.
So again, they referring to the rarities of these Bored Apes, because instead of going the traditional background trading card route like Gary Vee did, where the background of your animal, whether it was gold, emerald, or just common, determined the rarity. In Matt's case, this collection he's talking about with the Bored Apes, all of the apes had different facial expressions. They had different clothes on. Some had hats on, some didn't. Some had bits of jewelry, etc., etc. And other bits were rarer than not. So, for example, I think a cowboy hat was relatively rare and quite desirable, whereas if you had an ape with nothing on, that was more common. Apart
from 4 trait, they all have different numbers of traits. So hat, glasses, top, whatever, background color, fur color. And so 4 trait apes are worth more because a lot of them have more than 4 traits. And then called fur. Like it's all easy to, with the benefit of hindsight, to see what's most valuable. I think the interesting thing for anyone starting really from scratch is on these PFP projects, it's all, as I understand it, computer generated. How the traits work in terms of, it's all a program of the image. The main image is the same, so it's this ape in the same looking in the same direction, but then the facial expressions, the clothing, it's all layered on that. And so when that project is minted in the first place, and to mint means to generate the piece that, or that one NFT
you
token.
You become the first person to, in essence, declare ownership of that asset on the blockchain, is what minting refers to.
Yeah, and so if you minted one, you wouldn't have been able to choose whether it had a particular trait, because it's just completely
it's
random.
Like a lucky dip. It's completely random.
Exactly. On projects that we've minted subsequently, of course, now we know a little bit about rarity and that sort of stuff. Of course, you just hope, but that's all you can do.
Cross the fingers and hope.
I guess there's a numbers game at play a little bit. If you mint 1,000 of the 10,000, then you'd be very unlucky not to get some good ones. But
absolutely.
So that's how that works. But yeah, and Bored Ape just turned out to be a leader in this space somehow.
So you bought yours for just under £6,000 in pounds, and at its all-time high, what was it worth?
I think it got to, in Ethereum, it got up to 120. Did it get to 150? 150 ETH.
Wow.
So essentially, at one point, it was worth over £300,000.
Wow. And
I think.
You didn't sell.
And we didn't sell it. And that was actually a very interesting part, because one of the reasons that we chose not to really talk to friends or family about what we were doing in the summer of 2021 was because we knew we didn't want to sell it, because we had learned enough, particularly the ape. We'd learned enough about that project at the time to know that or just not to know, because you don't know anything, but to have the confidence or a gut feel that holding on to it was the right thing to do. When you recognize that a lot of influential people, celebrities, sports people, artists, musicians, movie stars had aped in at that point, and they had an ape, and actually some of them were using it as their profile picture on Twitter as well, but there were only ever going to be 10,000 of these things, and they were increasing that much in popularity, which is why the floor price rose the way it did. It felt very obvious to us that this was good long-term investment. That's not what we thought when we bought it. We didn't think at all. We just bought it.
Yeah, no, they quickly rose to meteoric heights, the Bored Apes, and a lot of people who may have seen NFTs appear in the news, quite often the pictures displayed in the articles are all of the Bored Apes, and this is largely due to what happened during earlier this year, really, was a whole bunch of celebrities got on board, and so you had people like M and Justin Bieber buying these Bored Apes and putting them as their profile pictures on Twitter, which of course absolutely shot up the value. They went rife in America, lots of NBA players and other big sports people buying it, and a whole host of other influential individuals. I think Jimmy Fallon, Paris Hilton, all have got these apes, and so it quickly became a very exclusive membership club, because again, tying it back to what NFTs are and why these apes were able to gain such value was because there were only 10,000, and there are only, at any time, a possible 10,000 definitive owners of these NFTs. And so if you go on Twitter, there's plenty of people who've got Bored Apes as their profile picture who have clicked and saved from someone else, but that person is unable to be part of the Bored Ape Yacht Club. They're not able to join the Discord. They're not able to go to the in real life events that you can only go to if you hold the NFT. And they certainly are not able to sell that picture to anyone else because they are not the owners of it. And so whilst they might be using the picture, they do not own it, and they are not able to get any of the tangible benefits that arise from owning it as an NFT.
Yeah, and they certainly wouldn't receive any of the benefits that came along with ownership, because as you touched on before, one of the benefits of this transparent, kind of very clear ownership because of the blockchain is the people behind the project can then decide to come up with new things. Nearly every project, certainly back then, had a roadmap about what was going to happen if you bought in, because they needed to encourage people to buy these in the first place. And so they had this roadmap of planned events. And for the apes, that meant that a few months in, I can't remember specifically how long, but they created this Bored Ape chemistry club, and you got airdropped to serum. So that appeared into your wallet, and then you could mix or combine this serum with your ape to create a mutant ape. And we won't go through all the details.
It was a whole rabbit hole of events.
But all of that then had a value. So like the mutants became worth kind of 10 ETH, then 15 ETH, then 20 plus. And so you were essentially being given more value because you owned the ape in the first place. But that's how it works, right?
Yeah.
So, and that can still happen now. It's happening less now because of the way the market has changed. But I think it's really important not just to share the highs as were throughout 2021 and even towards the start of this year, 2022, but to recognize that these, certainly the blue chip projects, the projects that we essentially wanted to acquire, and why we chose to create this Moonshot DAO in the first place, was because everything had got that bit more expensive. But because of the sort of 15 months that we've now gone through, it's become reasonably, not certain, but the blue chip NFT projects, we certainly feel we know what a handful of those are. And even in this very different market that we're in now, a lot of them are still holding their price and could at any time provide more benefits and advantages to the holders because that's what they're able to do.
100%. And what a crazy journey the last 15 months have been, certainly for yourself. I've had my fair few little roller coaster rides in the world of NFTs as well. But just want to reassure everyone, if you're listening, that all of this crazy stuff that we talk about when it comes to NFTs will all begin to make sense. The traits, the additional bonuses, etc., etc. It will all click at one point, I'm sure. And so I just want to touch on then another example which really made the whole concept of NFTs really click and really make the pin drop in my mind. And that was in reference to NFTs and events, and more specifically ticketing. So here's an example for you. Imagine that Drake had an upcoming concert and you obviously want to go. Now, instead of buying your regular ticket, let's imagine the ticket you buy is going to be an NFT. And so this NFT can do the following few things for you. First of all, it's going to be designed by a very cool artist. It's going to look very cool. It's a Drake concert. Look at his album artwork. It will be reflective of him and that particular concert. Number two is because you now own that ticket, it acts as a piece of concert memorabilia. So there's a chance that in future it might actually be worth something. And because you're the original owner of it, and it's an NFT, so it's digital, it's not a piece of paper in your pocket, it's not going to get repped, you'll be able to potentially transfer that on and sell it in the future. For example, imagine if you had a ticket stub from one of a very early Beatles concerts from when they were not even big. If you had that now, that would be worth a lot of money, and that could potentially be the same with your Drake concert NFT. Now, another interesting aspect of it is inside the venue, your NFT could actually then function as your means of getting snacks and drinks. A very random example, but last week I was in Belgium, in Brussels, and I was watching Coldplay perform live. And so when I walked into the stadium, I was very surprised that actually in order to access any of the food and beverage stands, you had to first go and get a Coldplay card, which I was very surprised to discover was a thing. But so you had to go and load up money onto a specific Coldplay card, and then you had to use that Coldplay card to transact everywhere in the venue. Very random. Was not expecting it, but it happened.
If you put too much money on and then didn't spend it on food and drink, did you get the money back?
You could, but you had to go through a painful process of redeeming it online, which my girlfriend tried to do because we thought we had loads of money, but then turns out we only had €1 because apparently we had a few more drinks than I remembered. But instead, your NFT could function as the Coldplay card, which at the time was quite the hassle because everyone's queuing to then get their bloody Coldplay cards. But then not only that, but what also makes NFTs unique, and we've not quite touched on a lot of this just yet this episode, but by being on the blockchain, in particular the Ethereum blockchain, NFTs are able to leverage what are known as smart contracts. And so these are basically just a set of instructions that are able to execute certain things. So, for example, if we were filming this podcast and at the end of the podcast, I said to Matt, I'm going to give you £1,000 for being on this podcast, which, disclaimer, Matt is not being paid to be on the podcast. Then the minute the podcast finished and I uploaded it to YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Spotify, then the smart contract would recognize that I've done that and that the podcast was complete, and it would automatically send the money to Matt. So it's just automatically executing instructions. And so in the case of this concert, the whole concert could run on a smart contract, meaning it could be set up so that Drake gets 40% of the proceeds, the DJ might get 10%, the lighting crew might get 2%, and the janitors might get 1%, and so on. But when we buy the tickets with the NFTs, instead of needing to someone get all the money together and then divvy it up and out, it can automatically be distributed based on those pre-existing parameters that we've set, which means wipes out the middleman, means there's no fees, and that it's super efficient. Now, of course, another thing these NFTs would do, if we're touching on the rarity aspect again, so there might only be however many 80,000 tickets to see Drake in Wembley. There might be 100 VIP ultra platinum tickets that would be special bits of artwork. But these would function in essence as your VIP passes. So if you bought these ones, then you'd be able to go and meet Drake afterwards, have a little party with him, and so on and so forth. But then where things really start to push the boat out, and I'm really excited to see how this particular aspect of NFTs is going to be utilized in the future. but is when it comes to distribution of royalties and equities, because there is a scenario where a budding young artist puts on a concert, or even it could be Drake, who knows, and goes to this concert, and by buying a ticket, you actually then become a shareholder in the concert or the tour. So your NFT actually functions as like a piece of equity, and therefore you, the NFT holder, can then be given a small slice of the profits that are generated if things work really well. Say he goes on a really global, successful tour and people buy all the merch, etc., and your NFT gets you 0.5% of the rights.
Yeah, and essentially it means that your earliest supporters can become your shareholders almost.
Exactly. And another great example of the use of NFTs that I came across, I heard it from Gary Vee, I believe, is in music. Because, of course, in the traditional world, if you're a music artist, your route to fame is to go through a record label, because they hold access to the distribution channels, they hold all the contacts and everything you need to really get a big platform and generate a big audience. But, of course, what do they take in exchange for that? A big proportion of all of your revenue, 50, 60 upwards percentage of all that you earn from your music. And so where NFTs have the potential to be very disruptive is within this, because what you could do if you were a young up-and-coming artist was, instead of pursuing a record label, you could instead create your album. And if you say you had a small number of fans, 10,000 fans, which with YouTube and social media is a trivial amount really for a young budding musician, and you could instead offer those fans your album in form of an NFT. So they'd get access to the album by buying the NFT, they'd get the piece of artwork that comes with it. But what would really make this really impressive is you could actually tie back and use a smart contract to give all of the holders of your NFT a percentage of the royalties from this music forever. So they are therefore taking the risk as your early fans to buy your music, but the big incentive.
But there's no risk because they like your music.
There's no risk because they like the music anyway, and they want to support you.
Yeah.
But they have the potential massive upside of, if you do blow up and do a Justin Bieber, then they'll be getting a percentage of the royalties, and you'll have a seriously loyal fan base, and you have now been able to raise the capital through the NFT launch to distribute your music and get on the streaming platforms and do everything you need to do without the record label, which I think is just a very interesting concept.
And I think an extreme example of this, and I couldn't tell you specific musicians and artists that this has happened for, because I know too little about music, but I'm sure that there are some bands in particular that when they started, they had a very small, loyal audience who supported them through them being a nobody to being a somebody, and then now they don't support them whatsoever because they consider them a sellout or whatever, because they went down the traditional route of have an agency and start to become a professional musician, essentially because you've got to get paid somehow. Exactly. But they've dropped them because they were like, they wanted what they were originally. That was not an option. It's an option as long as they don't want to eat too much. But of course now they could be your initial fundraisers, shareholders, and the fact that you could use these smart contracts to reward them with anything you do in the future, whether it's 1%, 0.5%, whatever it might be of your future sales. And because of the access to utility part of it, you could invite them to specific events, give them unique VIP passes, all that sort of stuff to properly appreciate what they did to get you started. And no one is losing. Essentially, you're just taking what would have gone to a huge,
arguably a tiny proportion as well, versus the 50 or 60% they would take.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the fact that because that money's not going to a kind of global PR brand or whatever, it can go to the people that got you started in the first place.
Exactly. So I, for one, am very interested to see, particularly over the next 6 to 12 months and beyond, how more and more different types and avenues of business are going to look to leverage this technology and what is possible with it, because all it takes is a quick Google to look at all of the huge colossal industry giants across basically every industry that are already beginning and looking and investing in NFT technology, how they're going to explore it, because it's very exciting and really the avenues are very vast.
And it's similar with art as well, as in physical and digital art. It's another important, the way most people explained NFTs when we got started was going down the line of digital art. That's what it was. And then Gary Vee came along and did a load of hand-drawn sketches, which a lot of people were not very complimentary about, but he did manage to sell for more than $1 million the actual art in Christie's, like the Christie's auction house did sell 2 or 3 of his physical drawings for $1 million plus. So not that bad. But the fact that, again, not close to this market whatsoever, but how difficult or how challenging would it be as an artist to get your paintings or whatever it may be into the into any art gallery, let's face it, but certainly into an art gallery that hundreds of thousands or millions of people are going to see. It takes, I would imagine, a lot of perseverance, a lot of luck, I would suggest. But the fact that can now all be done online as an NFT, because there is a way of bridging both the physical and digital, they're also now open to so many possibilities because of NFTs.
100%, and a bigger audience, because obviously I don't want to speak for an artiste because I'm certainly not one myself, but I can imagine it's a very long and difficult road to get recognition and be displayed in a prestigious place. But of course, that prestigious place is tied down to whatever physical location it may be. And so even if it's the wonderful Saatchi Gallery in London, when you are now putting your art on the digital world, you open yourself up immediately to an almost unfathomable amount of eyes at very easy reach.
Yeah, and this would be, I think, a perfect time to talk about the community aspect of NFTs, right? Because when I think about the story that we learned about an artist called Fewocious, that's Fewocious, who was, as I understand it, a 18-year-old unknown artist that became known within the NFT world first, and then because, certainly won't go into the full story, but worth a Google because it's an amazing story. But the real power came from when a community was established of people that liked his art. And how does that ever happen in the physical, normal art world? I don't know because I don't own any, but if you own a fine art piece, are you in some sort of
Damien Hirst, let's say,
club, or do you get to meet other owners? Do you have a chat on an app in your phone that you can communicate with the other owners of that artist? Of course, I'm sure you don't. Perhaps in the top realms of these communities, maybe there's a handful of people that do know each other.
I've certainly never connected with the fellow owners of the picture of a cat making sushi that I have in my bedroom.
Quite. And so the fact that nearly all or most of the NFT projects that certainly we've been part of or heard of have a community through a Discord, which I'm sure you'll describe better than me, Elliott, but it's a place where all, not even necessarily owners of the NFTs can join. There's usually a main Discord group for that founder or person or artist that really anyone and everyone is welcome into the Discord, and then there'd be a private holders channel for the actual owners of the tokens, that they are like a unique group within the overall group, let's say. But what it means is you've got people essentially in what's very similar to a WhatsApp group, like really just on your...
It basically is WhatsApp group, but just where everyone in the NFT world and the gaming world have just migrated. And so it's just, as Matt describes, the home of these communities. If you want to seek out other people with NFTs, they're likely on Discord. It's become a staple of almost every NFT project, that in order for a project to have success, it's got to have people that are connected and have a shared interest in it. And that shared interest derives largely from these Discord communities. And so when you're getting your toes dipped into the NFT world, you'll hear about Discord a lot. Yeah, that is certainly for sure. But community, as you describe, is a truly powerful part of the world of NFTs.
And it is a great place to start because it's completely free. There are no barriers if you just download the Discord app on your phone.
Apart from the slightly chaotic vibe.
Yeah, there's a lot of, certainly in an active Discord group, there's a lot of, it's an online chat essentially. So a lot of people talking over each other and conversing. It can be tricky to keep up, but the best thing, again, to do is just to get involved. Just to post something, to say hello, to start a chat as if you would if you'd walked into a bar and there were that many, all the people that were currently active in that Discord group were just in there, and you walked up to them and you said hello and you introduced yourself. That's essentially what you're doing. You're just doing it online. There is that anonymity to it, which is helpful because it makes you feel quite safe. Normally you would have some people do use their real picture as their
but it's
avatar
a place
or whatever.
People display their NFTs as their profile picture.
Indeed. So normally no one knows who you are. No one even knows whether you're male, female, whatever. Everyone just assumes you're male because in this world, that's the assumption, which is a bit unfair. And
we're hoping that will change in the future.
Lots of women's projects that are trying to do something about that.
So it's a very apt analogy, is that, although I do laugh in my head thinking about walking into a pub in front of 1,000 people and introducing myself, how awkward that would be.
True.
But no, it's a very good point. And I think it's a good little segue, Matt, just for us to touch on the different types of NFTs, because what we talked about today, we've covered quite a lot already, including some of the projects that you got involved with initially. But there's definitely already a few distinct types of NFTs that everyone new and learning about NFTs ought to be aware of, because these are the sorts of things that you'll come across. Of course, this is very early days and very fast moving, evolving industry, so it's very liable to change, and we're excited to see what it evolves into. But so the first and most common and most popular ones really are what are known as PFPs, which is what Matt touched on with his Bored Ape. Now, these are profile picture NFTs, so this is what, if you venture into the realm of crypto Twitter, all these NFTs, the primary value of it is to really flex your digital identity and show that you are one of the Bored Ape holders, because it's your Twitter profile picture, and therefore you're part of this exclusive club, which at its all-time high was worth £300,000. And that's what's built upon that, is the feeling of connection and community between the holders, because of course Matt's used to have his Bored Ape, but I'm sure he'll touch on the story of why he doesn't have it anymore in a future podcast. But so does Justin Bieber, Eminem, and all these other celebrities. So there's real value in feeling a part of that community. I think the next big avenue, again, is what Matt was just describing, is art. A lot of people see NFTs as the evolution of fine art, and really a new platform for modern artists, and a lot of photography is very big on it as well. But to actually begin to get their artwork out there in a meaningful way online and really generate an audience, but also start to generate some income, because previously, if you're a digital artist and you upload a picture of your art, everyone's got that picture of the art now. There's no value to it because it can just be circulated and spread. Whereas in NFT form, there's now a proof of ownership, which therefore establishes the value and means that you as an artist can get paid. So that's been quite an interesting evolution. Yeah. Then to build on art, there's a whole aspect of generative art, which is something that I've certainly been really diving down the rabbit hole recently, and is a bit of a personal favorite of mine at the moment. But generative art is a real innovation in the blockchain space. It's been around before blockchain, but it's amplified by blockchain in terms of its coolness, in my opinion. And all generative art is art that is produced not by necessarily an artist, but by an algorithm, a set of instructions. And so where this gets really cool with NFTs, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about this in future episodes, is that when you mint an NFT, like Matt touched on, you're the first person to basically put that proof of ownership of this NFT onto the blockchain. With generative art, when you mint one, the art doesn't exist until you, the buyer, actually go and mint it. Because when you mint it, you in essence press go and you run the instructions that create this art for the very first time. So you, in essence, you birth a piece of art from the click of your mouse, which is fantastic, which is a very cool concept. And so that then obviously is stored on the blockchain, and you have a bit of a personal touch to it. So that's very cool. Then there's a lot of utility tokens. So very much like Gary Vee and his V friends, whilst they've got the collectible aspect, he's really built in all these in real life benefits. There are many other projects that are based around membership clubs. So if you own one, it's just a membership card almost, and that gets you access to all these in real life benefits.
Yeah, I think the most easy to understand one that we became aware of, again, Gary Vee related, is a project called the Fly Fish Club, which is a new restaurant that he's opening up in New York next year. So that is an NFT only restaurant. So the only way that you can get a table in that restaurant, the only way you can go and eat in that restaurant is if you own a Fly Fish Club NFT. Could have called it something easier to say, but yeah, that's exactly that. It's using all the benefits that come from NFTs to create an in real world club, restaurant in this case. And the interesting thing about it, and we haven't talked about this much in this episode, I'm sure we will in future ones, is that there is a secondary market for really NFT. And so if we bought one of them now, not living in New York, it might seem like a crazy thing to do, but essentially we could maybe go to the restaurant once if we went to New York for some reason. Long way to go for dinner, but I'm sure it'd be worth it, be an experience. But then once we've been there, and perhaps even if we hadn't, we could sell it on the secondary market. And the benefit to the kind of project founders is that they earn a fee on all secondary sales.
And so that's thanks to the smart contract element of them, right?
Yeah, that's a huge passive secondary income for the founders of these projects, which is a huge benefit.
It is very cool because, to be clear on that, so most NFTs have written in the code behind them, whenever someone sells this NFT for whatever price it might be, 0.1 ETH, 1 ETH, that a certain percentage which they decide will automatically go back to the creator. So it enables this secondary revenue stream for all these artists, people behind the projects, to continue to make revenue from it, which is a very interesting concept.
Yeah. And it means that it's another way that these can become an investment as much as just something you want to own and use, because as things become more popular, let's say this restaurant opens next year and it just has the best first 3 months ever. Once people recognize that these NFTs are the only way that you're ever going to eat at that restaurant, unless you have a friend that owns one, they're going to go up in value. It becomes an investment that you can make money on yourself as well. So
very exciting piece of utility.
For sure.
Very exciting. And then the final big category at the moment is the gaming and, of course, the metaverse. And we've all seen Facebook transition from being Facebook to Meta, and we've all heard about the upcoming metaverse and how it's going to take over our lives and how soon we'll all be working from home and, in essence, conversing in a virtual world. And so that is a very big aspect as well. So to round off this podcast, I think it's good to just touch on the question. The NFT market has been through a turbulent ride, shall we say. We saw these crazy heights a few months ago, and now everything's come slamming down. So it begs the question, has the bubble burst? Is it too late to get into NFTs? Interested to hear your thoughts on that at the moment.
Yeah, I think, it has to be seen alongside all other markets, which I think, if we're all honest with ourselves, have also changed in a very turbulent time for all markets at this point. I think it's only doing what everything else is doing. I think it was a bit of a bubble. I think it did get to extreme levels for sure. And so it probably has fallen a bit further than some other markets, but certainly people that we've listened to over the last 15 months have said that was always likely anyway. I think knowing what we know now, and let's face it, we wouldn't have set up this Moonshot DAO if we thought anything different, is we remain certain that it's not just an investment, but it's a long-term opportunity. And actually that makes it quite exciting, because it means that now it has come down in value, or a lot of these projects have dropped in value. First of all, they become a lot more affordable, and it means that you can get involved with projects that were 6 months ago, even less than that in some cases, double, triple, 5 times the value that they are now. And of course, you have to make a decision over whether you think it's going to get back there. That's one thing I'd say on that is, again, to coin a phrase that Gary Vee uses often, is bet on the jockey, not on the horse. So when you're doing your research into projects, it's to look at who's behind it rather than just the project itself, especially with these PFPs, because the community themselves can go hot and cold. And just because a particular, a duck or a whatever it might be image that people found appealing,
very emotionally driven,
they could go off it, especially if the founders take a U-turn or change their minds on something.
Well, yes, and I was involved in a project that turned out the founder was a lengthy career criminal involved in a massive scam where he stole over $150 million.
Yeah, and so it doesn't take long for people to switch off to that.
Didn't take long for my money to go from whatever amount to zero.
Yeah, but I think whilst you mentioned that, it's important to recognize that because we are so early in this, there are so many opportunities to choose the wrong one. There's a lot of scams and stuff. So if you do start, especially just based on anything that you've heard in this, then be very cautious. And if it looks too good to be true, it generally is too good to be true.
Yeah,
we'll definitely go into more detail on mistakes we've made in future episodes, because I think it's important to share.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a very apt and good take, because my personal opinion is that, NFTs are a true emerging technology, so we've got to have somewhat of a long-term view of it. I do believe there was a pretty explosive bubble that happened in the last 12, 15 months, and we're seeing that come to a big end now. What that's being driven by, I think, is a combination of the global macroeconomic factors, and we're all in a pending recession at the moment, post-COVID. So that's, of course, going to affect these very risky assets that NFTs are. I also think it's a bit reflective of the early tech bubble, when you have all these emerging companies and people trying to jump on the tech bandwagon, i.e. trying to start a project just because it's popular. And so what that's led to was an influx of rubbish projects. And if you look at the market now, there's a very large proportion of all NFT projects that are averaging 95 to 96% losses and down. But the small proportion that, as you said, betting on the jockey, not the horse, the ones with the solid teams with the long-term vision that have grand plans to deliver something really valuable to the world, have been hit very hard, there's no question about that, but are still maintaining some very valuable prices. And so certainly from our Moonshot DAO point of view, our NFT investment fund point of view, we're looking as a pretty good time to buy. Of course, no, not financial advice, do your own research, but we're eyeing up some opportunities. Do I think it will go lower over the next few months? Absolutely. I do think there's a bit more pain to come. However, I think this is also the perfect opportunity to get educated, to start to understand the market, start to get a feel for what makes a good project, what is a worthwhile NFT that I wouldn't mind buying and holding for a few years. Because whilst there's a chance that everything goes to zero, I think there's also a chance that a few of these really do continue to gain quite a lot of value in the future. And as the wise Warren Buffett once said, when there's blood in the streets, you've got to be greedy. And so I think that is a perfect place to round off this first episode. So thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you found it useful and insightful. Matt, thank you very much for joining. We look forward to bringing you a host of other episodes over the ensuing weeks, where we'll be covering, as Matt says, all of the pitfalls that we made in our early NFT journey, what blue chip projects we think are out there, what do we need to look for in an NFT project to evaluate whether it's good or not, and so on and so forth. So please make sure you like and subscribe. Follow us at the Moonshot DAO, and have a truly wonderful day. To the moon.